Normally, I do a Friday stream, usually in the evening times, but I was asleep yesterday, so I never really got around to doing that. So I guess I'll just do one tonight. This is going to be pretty informal. I'm just going to discuss uh, some of the goings on and thoughts about it. And, if anybody wants to chime in, as long as they're respectful or, polite, not only to each other, but also with me, then, you're more than welcome to come in and ask questions or whatever else you want to do. I didn't really have anything planned, because there really isn't all that much to talk about that I haven't covered really in the last two lives I did, or that I haven't shared in my community tab. So, I guess I'll just go over some of that stuff, and if people want to ask me any questions or whatever, or discuss something, I'm more than open to that. As people come in, welcome. Again, this is going to be informal, so I'm just going to go ahead and start. Hey, Juan, good to see you. Yeah, I was saying, Juan, before you came in, that this is going to be a rather informal type of thing where people, if they have any questions, they can pitch topics or ask me questions, and I'll be more than happy to discuss them because really, hey, all smiles, excellent to see you. And for my moderators, pretend for my moderators, make sure that everybody's being polite. I said pretend, I meant polite. Make sure everybody's being polite. So just if anybody's being rude, kick them out. But I've been having an issue with shills as of lately. But anyways, this is an open forum. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free, or discuss something or pitch a topic, go ahead. But I was going to start. Hey, Brogan, good to see you. I was going to start by talking about some of the stuff I've shared in community lately, and also what I've touched on in the past couple lives that maybe I could build on a bit in this one. So, as the thumbnail, I put some Russian vehicles on the move as it relates to their buildup that they're doing and probably almost done with, I would imagine, because they had started this buildup weeks ago. So I would imagine that they're, getting their last logistical dumps moved forward and vehicles and units all lined up because like that Gonzalo Lira video I shared said, they've built up even more forces since that 300,000 number was disclosed. It's actually more like 540,000. And evidently that's the new number because it's not just him, it's others that have been saying that. So, I guess it's formal now. So I'm going to go with that 540 number. That's way more than I had thought, because I remember many weeks back, it was the 300,000 reservists that got called up, but now it's quite a bit more than that. So 540,000 is nothing to sneeze at to invade a country the size of the Western proxy country in Eastern Europe. So yeah, they're doing that buildup primarily in Belarus and also in the part of Russia that is the Belgorod region that touches the eastern half of the Western proxy country, and they're building up these large Russian army formations in those areas, ostensibly so that they can launch their big coming offensive. And what better time than winter to do such a thing? Because in wintertime, it's very cold. It's very miserable for the defender, especially when they have no electricity because the grid is being systematically eliminated in that country. The people are probably going to have, be at their wits' end with all of this anyway pretty soon. I don't see them, being able to continue on much longer. Even after eight entire mobilizations of their population, their armed forces has shrunk, and they're having a very, very difficult time maintaining their resistance against the Russians because the Russians fight wars much differently than the West focuses its energies in such in warfare. The Russians have a propensity to do a lot of like grinding down, gradual attrition based warfare, but that's not to say that they won't do a massive offensive to finish off that country. Absolutely, they will, because by and large, so far, this thing has been a small, limited incursion, an incursion by which the limited incursion forces of Russia, going by average Russian battalion sizes of 65,000 odd troops, were heavily outnumbered within the borders of the Western proxy country that they went into. Because you have to understand, at the very beginning, the Ukrainians started the conflict with 650,000 or so odd troops, and the Russians went in with like 1/10 of that number. So it only makes sense that they did a gradual grinding sort of conflict, largely prosecuted by artillery and missile strikes, and very, very limited use of mechanized warfare, like up in Kharkiv, where you saw the Russians ceding ground, letting the Ukrainians move in, and they would shell the hell out of them, and then they would move back in and take it. That's happened now several times, but that's a very, very limited type of occurrence because, again, the numbers are, they were pretty lopsided, but now that Russia seems to be starting to take this all a lot more seriously, they called up their reserves and they moved a lot of forces into place, and 540,000 is a lot of troops not to use for some massive type of offensive. That's an immense amount of forces to take a country the size of what really amounts to be about a couple times the size of Texas, to capture that country. That's an immense amount of forces for that. So they're backed up by a full complement of about 3,500 different types of artillery pieces, another 1,500 tanks, and I'm talking about all these things are in addition to what they already had been using up to this point with their small, limited incursion forces. And the once larger 650,000 forces of the Ukrainians, between their active, their reserves, and their paramilitary, have been gradually ground down to now 190,000 troops remaining. And that's after 8 different rounds of mobilizations in order just to be able to replace all their heavy losses. And their losses, by that I mean their KIAs, their WIAs, their wounded, and their POWs. So they've had to replace psychotic amounts of forces. They've lost a lot of troops in this endeavor, and it's a shame for them because it was all really for nothing because they're not going to win this thing. And now the West is having trouble pilfering for items to be able to even send. I read something not that long ago about how they're trying to get old Russian equipment from Morocco and Algeria and some other places. Even that Duran channel talked about how they were going and looking in the Middle East for weapons and stuff too. So it's actually turning out quite to be a desperate situation. So much so that Western forces in NATO are now doing a counter-buildup to what the buildup the Russians are doing in Belarus and also, in Belgorod area of Russia are. They're trying to amass hundreds of tanks in Poland and whatever type of artillery they can scrounge together from, NATO artillery forces. And I mean, because, NATO's heavily outnumbered in artillery. So, they're doing a counter buildup. Now, I don't know all the exact numbers for the Western NATO forces, but I know what I've read as far as what the 4 biggest NATO contributors actually have in terms of their equipment, their artillery. They have a massive deficit in artillery pieces when compared to Russia, and also ammunition, as the NATO war games have shown. Because in the NATO war games, France and Britain run out of shells. They exhaust their entire national stockpile of artillery howitzer shells in 8 whole days. That's it. That's all it takes. 8 days, and they're out of shells. And Germany and Italy have not. They're not quite as well developed as Britain and France's forces are. They're not quite as dedicated or professional, especially in Germany's case. Germany horribly maintains their military. They used to actually look really good on paper right after the Cold War ended. They had quite a lot of equipment, but they sold so much of it off, not just the old East German stuff, but they also sold off a lot of the West German stuff at reunification. I mean, it took a little time after reunification for them to start, getting rid of everything, but they did. They trimmed themselves down to a dangerously small level. Whereas at reunification, when both the armed forces of the East German and West German militaries came together, when they amalgamated, they had almost 1 million troops. I mean, for a country the size of Germany, that's actually not that bad. That's actually fairly big for a country of Germany's size. But they trimmed it all down, and now with reserves and everything, they only have about like 200,000 troops. I mean, it's very small. It's like 1/5 the size of what they were at reunification, and the equipment situation's even worse. I mean, their artillery pieces, they're horribly lacking in artillery. Italy too, same with Britain and France. They really don't have that much artillery either, not in terms of the overall pieces or in the ammunition for it. So whatever's being scrounged together by these NATO forces is whatever is going to contribute to this counter buildup that they're doing in Poland. All I know for sure is that it's the tanks that they're putting together in Poland, they're in the hundreds. Like I think it's pretty close to 1,000 or so. But Russia has 1,500 additional tanks in their buildup, and then they have 3,500 artillery pieces. And I'm saying in addition to what they're already using in their limited incursion forces that were in the east of Ukraine. So this is going to be a big finale, and the NATO rapid response forces that are basically along their eastern frontiers in like the Baltic states, like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, also Poland, also Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. It's really not that many forces. They had 12 rapid response battalions, and they were deployed all up and down NATO's eastern frontier. And now they said recently that they doubled it or something. Well, almost doubled it. It was like 20-something thousand troops that they added to that. So it's like, I think the grand total was about 30,000. Well, no, that's a little more than double. So yeah, but that's still though, that's 30,000 against like Russia's 540,000 that they're putting together. And the other interesting thing to note is that Belarus and Russia, Lukashenko mentioned that they unified their armed forces, which means that they now, the armed forces of Belarus and Russia have unified their military commands under Russian control. So that is a strategic level development. So that way, if say NATO were to try to like formally jump in, since Belarus and Russia are allies, they wouldn't have any trouble coordinating their actions. So that's why the Belarusians, that's why Lukashenko put his armed forces under the strategic control of the Russian Defense Ministry. So that's an interesting development. And then, of course, you have the Chinese troops that are in Belarus and also in Serbia, as I've spoken of many, many times. The big armored formations that were sent further to the west into Belarus after they did their military drills with the Russians outside of Moscow, they're still there. They're still in Belarus. And you also have the Chi-Com forces that flew in all of those cargo aircraft trips back and forth months ago. You have all those forces that have been building up in Serbia. So the Sino-Russian coalition have an immense amount of troops and resources in Eastern Europe that they can use. Meanwhile, the West is decaying. It's falling apart. You're having situations with the energy crisis in Europe. And also now, what do we see here? We see all these, power grid and infrastructure assaults going on in our country. I mean, a country cannot make war when it has no power or a way to basically, manufacture things that are critical to a war effort. I mean, when you have no power grid, your factories aren't going to work. What little factories we even have left. I mean, this is a testament to the whole uh, quantity has a quality all on its own, and Russia and China have the quantity, and they have immense amounts of stocks of artillery, of missiles, of all kinds of items. Especially China. Especially China. They have this freakishly massive industrial capacity. They have 40% of the entire world's manufacturing base in just China, and they have the biggest military industrial complex on earth. Russia has the second overall biggest. But yeah, you see all these developments going on, and the Ukrainians, they're doing horrible. They're doing horrible. Their effort is falling apart. Their war effort's falling apart. So surely it's not going to last that much longer before the Russians have, they decide to strike. I mean, all you really need to do is go and watch those videos I've shared in my community tab. The most recent one was yesterday, so it's not looking good there. But also you see what I told people about the situation in China. I told people what would happen with that. I said it would go nowhere, and lo and behold, it went nowhere. The Chinese government was never threatened with being overthrown. They like I said, even if it did get out of hand, they just would have gone Tiananmen Square on the whole thing. Now, Tiananmen Square wasn't just that one place in Beijing. In 1989, there were student revolts actually going on throughout China, but they all got crushed. Because the Chinese people aren't adequately armed to be able to overthrow a regime like that, especially now that China has the most powerful armed forces on the face of the earth. They have no real chance of overthrowing that regime. I mean, it's like I said before, the West has a tendency to do their color revolutions, whereas the East has a tendency to infiltrate and subvert Western countries. So both countries have covert types of warfare going on against one another right now as we speak. The Chinese have infiltrated and subverted our society immensely, and they also base their troops on our territory, on all the CCP properties they purchase, while we, meanwhile, try to incite all these different color revolutions, which the one in Kazakhstan failed, the one in Belarus failed, the one in Serbia failed, and the ones in Iran failed, because that happened a few times in recent history in Iran. And then they tried one in China. Well, that failed. China kicked out all their NGOs after 2019. They kicked out all the Western NGOs. So that kind of shows you that they're pretty hip to what the West tries to do in other countries. But see what the chat's saying. So I kind of got started with all that. Let's see. Yeah, it's a sad situation, cats. Really, this whole thing, it would be ideal if it wasn't going on, but really, this is doing a lot more damage even than just to Ukraine. It's damaging our capabilities as well, because of all the money and weapons we send them, and we don't have the ability. We do not have the industrial capability to replace everything that we've given away. It's really hurting us too. It's hurting our defense. It's hurting, what little defensive capabilities we've had left after our military went woke and depleted itself, not just in Afghan, but also in Iraq and Syria. What little we had left has been just, pissed away. And our military's woke. It's not even able to train properly. I mean, China and Russia are going to rip us a new asshole. I mean, it's going to be bad. When we get invaded, it's going to be bad. Now, I hear people talking about this type of a Pearl Harbor situation. Well, no, I mean, because when we get invaded, it's going to be a complete surprise, and it's going to be a lot bigger than Pearl Harbor ever was. This is going to be a nationwide invasion. It's going to make Operation Barbarossa, which was up until now was the biggest. Oh, it's coming from their reserves, cats. Russia has mobilized a lot of their reserves. Russia actually has a large armed forces. They like if you count their reserves, like every military on Earth has reserves. Russia's reserves are pretty big. They have 2 million reserves. We have. I think our military's reservists are something like in the 700,000 number. I'm pretty sure that's right. Our National Guard is like 500,000. Basically, our entire reserve forces, if you count the National Guard and our reservists, it's like just over 1 million. So, because our active duty forces aren't even really that big. I mean, our active duty army is only like 500,000 strong, and it's probably a lot less than that now because of all the purges that went on, where they purged out so many people for not complying with the, beast mark mandates and everything else. The armed forces of the United States is now threatening to get rid of a total. Now listen to this: 500,000 troops. That's a quarter of what we have left, basically. Well, almost a quarter. That is an immense amount of people that they're talking about purging for not complying with these mandates and this, to take this abomination into their arms. They're talking about getting rid of a quarter of all of our remaining forces. That is insanity. That's going to leave us so woefully, just depleted of personnel. It's lunacy. It's total lunacy. How is a country anyway with the size of the armed forces we have? Our total armed forces size is only 2.2 million personnel. That's it, and it's spread all around the world too. How is a country with our personnel numbers supposed to take on a country like China that has a combined population of between their active reserves and their enormous paramilitary? How are they supposed to take on a country like China that has 29 million men under arms? Their paramilitary alone, and that's their PAP, which is their People's Armed Police. It's like their new Praetorian Guard / like Waffen SS type organization. They have like 3.5 million in the PAP. Then you got like the National Militia, which is close to 10 million strong. Then you have the Marine Militia. There's like another 4 million. Then you have the National Construction Corps. There's another 1.5 million. And then you have the remainder as the PLA Strategic Reserve, not the regular PLA Reserve, but the PLA Strategic Reserve, which is like a home defense force that goes under PLA control at a time of war. Then they have their regular reserves, which are 5 million. Then they have their active duty military, which is the 4 branches of their military. Their PLAN, their PLAGF, which is their ground forces, their army, then their PLAAF, and then their strategic rocket forces. That's 4 million. So there's 29 million under arms right there. And the qualitative edge of China has gone way up since 1990s. I mean, China's technology has moved forward by leaps and bounds. Their doctrines, their way they revamped their entire armed forces, they totally reorganized their whole armed forces. Whereas it used to be these massive, unwieldy corps-size formations of like, you might have like a whole corps of nothing but infantry, which is like 30,000 infantry troops. And you might have like a corps of nothing but tanks and a corps of whatever else, But now they took all of that apart and they reorganized it more along the lines of like how our army used to be, where they have combined arms units, where they combine, artillery, tanks, and infantry, and signals, and special forces, and all kinds of stuff into one unit, like one brigade or one division, like they don't have these big corps size formations anymore, minus the paramilitary forces. Now it goes from like group army, and a group army is broken down into different divisions, brigades, and regiments, and sometimes, independent battalions, if it's like a whole special forces battalion or something like that, They revamped the entire structure of their armed forces to make them even more effective by how the basis upon which they're reorganized. And then also their technology is like advanced by leaps and bounds. I mean, like just the way that they can integrate their electronic warfare capabilities, which they have phenomenal electronic warfare capabilities. China and Russia both do, but China's, they can integrate their anti-satellite weapons, their electronic warfare, their cyber warfare, which that's insane. And then they can implement their new missile technologies, their better tanks that they've produced, all of this new stuff they've produced. They can integrate it all. And with artillery and everything else and air power, and the way they can wage war is just insane. Like you fight how you train, and the Chinese training has only grown qualitatively better and better. And people are like, oh, well, China doesn't have any recent battle experience. Well, wrong, fail, totally wrong. Because not only have they fought a counterinsurgency in the West, in Xinjiang, but they've also fought border clashes with the Indians really not that long ago even. And I'm talking about more than just hand-to-hand type stuff. That the only reason it was hand-to-hand in 2020 is because they used to shoot at each other. And then there was all the border clashes with the Indians. Then you had the Chinese invasion of Vietnam, which was a limited incursion into Vietnam. The Chinese watched everything we did and other countries did and learned from it. That's partially what led to their reorganization of forces. They've learned from everybody and from their own experiences. So China is this military, economic, financial, and industrial superpower, technological superpower, and they've spent all this time just building up, so that they could go after us, who they perceive as their real enemy. Meanwhile, we're gutting ourselves, we're depleting ourselves, we're giving away all our shit, we're hollowing ourselves out, and we have nothing to show for it. We gutted our industries, our military. It's not looking good. It's not looking good at all. And yeah, cats. Yeah, Russia has big reserves. They have 2 million reservists. And it's like their reserves, just for them to mobilize what it was originally, it was 300,000, but if it's like 540,000, that's just barely over a quarter of all the reserves they have. And they've sent them with their full complement of artillery, tanks, air support, everything that's being built up in Belarus and also in the Belgorod region of Russia, which is just to the north of eastern Ukraine. They're building up this massive strike force. And this whole limited incursion that Russia did has gradually ground down the Ukrainian armed forces over a span of going on now 9 months. It's 8 months. So the Ukrainians have been struggling against this smaller force, this limited incursion force, and also against, to be fair, also against the Russian proxy forces like the DPR and LPR forces. They've been fighting them too, but after having struggled for so long against those other forces, and now that they're so laser focused on trying to fight those forces in the east, that's going to be the pinning action for this big invasion. Like I explained in past videos, what they're going to do is they're going to do a big broad sweep from Belarus and also from Belgorod and move to the south. You don't build up a force like that. You just don't. You don't build up a force like that to not use it. Why would you build up over 500,000 troops to not do anything with them? It wouldn't make any sense. They have to be building all of that up in those places to do that exact thing. And all indications point to that, because they know that after a certain point, it's going to be basically easy for them just to roll in there. Who's going to stop them? The only thing that would really be able to be a nuisance or a hindrance to such a thing would be like the natural terrain, like the Pripyat marshes, because moving heavy formations through the Pripyat marshes would bottleneck them onto roadways, like these causeways, these well-engineered roads that are built on causeways that go through this marshy terrain. Those would be easier to defend, but that's the whole point of why they need a pinning action in the east. Because they need to, that's what I'm saying, cats. They mobilize them all so that after they go in there and take over, they're going to use that as like an occupation army, sort of like what what's his name said, Gonzalo Lira said. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Not only is that a massive strike force, but it's also for the occupation after they take over the place. It's a bad situation. It's a bad situation. So it's bad for not just Ukraine. It's bad for the West. Because we've broken our backs on a proxy conflict. We've invested all these weapons, and it's gotten so bad that now we have to pilfer for other weapons around the world in other countries. We have to go ask for old, Soviet era weapons to send to the Ukrainians because it's easier for them to train on because they already know how to generally use all those items. Whereas the Western weapons are more complicated and they take a lot more time to train their forces up on. And it's true. It's true. It takes many, many weeks to train people on some of these systems. So it leads to the obvious, which means that there are Western troops using that equipment inside Ukraine. But they're not wearing Western uniform. They're dressed in Ukrainian attire, which is true. I mean, they've already caught a bunch of them, and they already told them, the ones that they caught, that if you're not a Ukrainian and we catch you, we're gonna put you through the Russian criminal court system. You're going to go to criminal court. They're going to be charged with terrorism. And then we're going to lock you in Russian supermax penitentiaries like Black Dolphin. It's a crazy, crazy thing to go fight in a proxy war because you never know if you're not from that country and they catch you, you don't know what they're going to do to you. I mean, they could be of the mind where they just execute people. Fortunately, that's not the case, but they could do stuff like that, or they could do like they're going to do, and they're going to try a bunch of them in criminal courts and then send them to Russian penitentiaries. It's not a good situation for anybody. And of course, you have the Russians who have their own foreign legion, so they're recruiting foreigners from countries that are traditionally allied with them, like Syria, like Iran. They use a lot of Chechens. They use a lot of their own people that got out of the old Russian military, but then they joined the Wagner Group, which is like a PMC by name, but it's really not a private military contractor service. It's really not. It's really just part of the Ministry of Defense, but they do a lot of wet works for the Kremlin so that so they could have like an air of plausible deniability. But that's the main force that had been fighting in Bakhmut for so long. And that battle's winding down. It's almost over with. And that's a key defensive area along the eastern front lines. That's a linchpin because it's got a lot of road and rail networks that run right through it. So once Bakhmut falls, it's really going to cut off a lot of logistical resupply between the northern parts of the line and the southern parts of the line, which, if they break through that area, they might even just, exploit the gains and, send extra forces through that region just so that they can surround and cut off both the forces in the north and the south, sort of like how, they like in World War II, where they would do like an armored spearhead during like the Blitzkrieg. They punch a hole through the enemy lines, and then they would swing around either side of it and trap forces into a pocket. Well, that could be the same type of thing that happens here, but it's also a pinning action because you're pinning down all of these forces of defenders in that one area, so that while they're pinned down, other areas of the country are not being that well defended, so that when you have this massive sweep come down from Belarus and also Belgorod, it just goes right on down without a hitch. They just roll on south and nobody's really able to stop them. It's a bad situation. Very bad. Cats. It's a limited incursion, but it's still very much an act of war. Absolutely. Yeah, it's an act of war for sure. It's just a limited incursion. It's not a full-scale invasion yet, but it will be. That's what those 540,000 extra troops are for. That's for the big invasion. It'll make what's happened so far look very small by comparison. It's going to be a big expansion to the war very, very soon. So they spent all that time Okay, well, you have a good night, Cats. Thank you for coming. Yeah, they spent all that time building up those forces, and they're going to use them. They're not gonna not use them. They're absolutely going to use them for a big offensive. And in the wintertime, that really is the best time, not just because the ground is frozen, but also because the will to resist, especially when your nation's had its power grid gone and it's hard to stay warm, the will to resist will have lessened substantially. So I'm sure that they might even wait for like the first really good winter storm to roll in before they actually commit to launching this thing, and it'll be massive, it'll be huge, and it'll overtake the place quick. They, after having been ground down to less than 200,000 troops from their original numbers, and that's after eight rounds of mobilization, it's going to be fairly easy for Russia to finish them off. That's really not that many forces left. It's they've been struggling for many months, so it's going to be rough. Yeah, yes, yeah, Cecilia, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I agree that. I agree there. Well, yeah, they had training. I'm reading what Cat said. Yeah, they had training. They're reservists, so they have had basic training. They're just not as they're not as they're not full-time troops. They're not active duty. They're reservists. So it'd be like when we send our reserves to war. They've had basic training and stuff already, but they're not full-time troops. They only get called up in a time of war, which is what happened here. So they do have training, but it's not to the extent that like active duty forces do, where you have active duty units that it's like they live, eat, breathe, and sleep training. It's like all they do because it's their whole career. Whereas reservists are only like part timers that get called up in times of war. But their active duty forces, that's their whole career. So they train all the time. Sort of like when I was in the active duty army for uh, the USA, back in the day when we did have a really good army, a really professional fighting force, we trained all the time. We trained all the time, but now they're having a hard time with that because there's a lot of key systems that they can't even get the training ammo for live ammo training. You know, I remember we used to do live ammo training a lot with our howitzers, with our field artillery pieces, and we would go out to the range a lot and shoot at the range and target shooting and whatnot. So with the pop up targets and also paper targets sometimes, we kind of alternated, but it's getting harder and harder for them to train with live ammo in our military because we like to give away all this key ammo for systems like artillery, anti-tank systems, all of this stuff. For them to try and do live ammo training, it's getting more and more difficult. So they're not, they're already woke and they're already more worried about being social justice warriors than real warriors. And then you add to it the fact that they can hardly do any real training, and not the effective kind with live ammo for certain systems. You have a real mess on your hands. You have a real disaster. So, yeah, you fight how you train. And if you can't train effectively, you're not going to fight effectively. It's just the way it is. You see here. Yeah. Well, Aaron, our foreign enemies can take us down easy, but they are austere minded and cheap. So yeah, they're probably happy that the regime. I don't even call it an administration. It's a regime. It's a rogue regime. They're happy that the rogue regime is helping their ends because you know they what they did was they hung a lot of dirt over their heads that they were caught in, like the MSS. did a lot of this. Same with the FSB, but especially the MSS, because they've held a lot of dirt over the heads of certain political parasites that got caught doing things that they ought not be doing, and they probably threatened to ruin them if they didn't, go along with their program. And that's how they got all these concessions, like CCP properties that were sold to them, and all these other things. They basically infiltrated and subverted and steered everything the way that they wanted it to go. But that's because that these political parasites are scumbags and they're sellouts, and if they're not sellouts, then they're totally compromised because they got caught doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But yeah, they did. Yeah, you're right in that way. They did have the cooperation of the regime, but it eventually, even if they didn't have the CCP properties, if they were just doing like the old way of warfare where they had to do like a straight up blitzkrieg, like come down from Canada and up from Mexico without the assistance of the Trojans, they'd still beat us. It would take them longer, but they would still beat us. The reason why the Trojans are so integral into fourth generation warfare is because when you have the foreign armies in every corner of your enemy's nation, they just pop up everywhere and take everything like immediately. Like it doesn't, like they don't have to roll for like hundreds and hundreds of miles to get to different places because they already have troops there. Like really all their targets are within like immediate striking distance of the CCP properties. So while the Trojans do the heavy lifting, the externals that come in from Canada and Mexico, they're more or less just like a heavy-handed reinforcement. So that way, by the time they get to like the middle of the country, they just all fan out and they, assist all the Trojans that are like really, really deep inland already, doing the heavy lifting. They're basically just coming in to help them. But if they fought the old way of warfare, yeah, they'd still take us over, but it would take them a lot longer. But the reason why they would still win is because we don't have the industries we used to have. We wouldn't have the, really, like our installations are weakly defended. They're not hard to overtake at all. It's, that if they went for the ones that are fairly closer to like the borders, both north and south, and they took those over. I mean, like if they took like McCord and Lewis and, all down here like Fort Hood and, what's that other one? Fort Bliss and all these other places, like they would pretty much wipe out like 90% of our forces right then and there, because all the rest of it that was like deeper inland, you'd have like your smaller forces that are like at like Fort Sill or Fort Riley, like, like a scattered division or two or a brigade or whatever here or there, or, however it's spread out. But we wouldn't be able to really like mobilize any sort of like big conscript armies either, because even without the Trojans, really, you wouldn't have the level of industry that would be necessary to be able to like arm and equip a hastily slapped together force, because we just, you wouldn't be able to fill the contracts for arms quick enough, especially after seeing what just happened over in Eastern Europe and how much we just pissed away over there. And then in addition, then add that to Afghan and add it to Iraq and add it to Syria when we intervened on behest of like a few of the factions in Syria. We ended up using a lot of ammunition between all those things. And now when you add this whole fiasco to it, it's just it's an immense amount of armaments we've wasted. We would be in a really bad way even without the Trojans. But here's the thing, though. The Trojans make it possible for them to take this whole country over in just a matter of several days. Whereas if it was like a regular old, like third generation warfare, like Blitzkrieg, because first generation warfare is when you have two opposing armies marching towards each other in a field, like, like from medieval times all the way up to like when muskets were introduced and you had armies like marching towards each other in a field. That's first generation warfare. Second generation warfare is like trench warfare. Third generation warfare is your Blitzkrieg. And then fourth generation warfare is when you combine Blitzkrieg, which is your externals, with the concept of the Trojan horse. You marry that together. So you have Trojans, then you also have externals, but the externals aren't the primary movers. It's the Trojans that it shifts to the Trojans to where they become the primary movers of the operation, because they're doing all the heavy work, like the heavy lifting and setting up logistical points and, for the externals coming in. it would shift. See, Blitzkrieg, you only had externals crossing borders, but in fourth generation warfare, you've got externals and you've got Trojans, and you mix it with newer, innovative technology like phenomenal levels of electronic warfare, cyber warfare, anti-satellite weapons, directed energy weapons, all kinds of things, hypersonics. I mean, robotics. You have all of these new innovative technologies combined with the strategy of using Trojans with externals. So you have like the externals take a back seat to the Trojans in this case because now the externals are the reinforcement, and then the Trojans, they're the main movers of the whole operation because without them you wouldn't be able to take over a country as quickly because since they're so close to their objectives because they start out inside the enemy's country, in secret, they capture stuff so quick. There's really like no time to react to it, especially when the grid has been knocked offline, when there's no water, no power, no telecom, no internet. GPS ain't working because like your FK-2000s that the Chinese have or your S-500s that the Russians have, and probably even more advanced stuff by now, takes out all the satellites. Then the electronic warfare is basically like a redundancy to jam any type of redundant systems that might have survived the satellite downing and like your communication systems and things like that. That would be like a redundancy, the electronic warfare, just to make sure that it gets anything that the anti-satellite weapons or the cyber warfare happen to miss, But that combining all those things into one doctrine is like, there's like nothing like that. Like that would be so devastating. There's no way to wage war that would even be like that. I think that would be like the final doctrine of all doctrines when it comes to like waging war is concerned. Like when it comes to like strategy, I think the fourth generation warfare method is like it's like the final way to wage war, like offensively. Like if you start off, you have properties and personnel that have snuck their vehicles in, their munitions, their logistics, because the Chi-Coms owned our ports, They snuck in all this stuff. They have the CCP properties that are even deeper inland that they can move all the stuff to, and then they have their personnel living among us, like disguised as civilians. That's like the ultimate way to get the drop on your enemy. Because once they get the call, and they go and suit up on their properties, get their vehicles ready, do their pre-maintenance services and checks, and fuel them up, and get all their logistics in order, and then they're given their their objectives. They'll take things over so damn quick it'll make people's heads spin. People won't even be ready for that. That's like the ultimate way to wage war. And then, of course, you have things like the Club K that figure into all that. Club Ks are your caliber cruise missiles that they fit 4 of them in a single container, so they're disguised as shipping containers. The Chinese have their own version too. So Russia and China both have the Club K. They both built their own versions, and they have thousands of these things in this country, thousands of those containers. So you're gonna have like maybe like, what is it, like the four per container. So even if you had like 10,000 units, that'd be like 40,000 of these missiles that would like just be popping up all over the place and like hitting key targets all over the country. There'd be no way to intercept all those. That would be a nightmare scenario. That see, in my invasion work, it begins with the anti-satellite weapons and the cyber attack going off, and then sometime after that is when the externals begin crossing the border, like basically immediately after that. And then the Trojans too start breaking out of their CCP properties. Then 2 hours later, only 2 hours later, all the Club Ks pop up around the land and start firing their salvos off. So that's the reason they fire all their missiles off 2 hours later, is to coincide with the the strike forces of the Trojans starting to capture their first objectives, so that there's nothing but like mass chaos and pandemonium without the grid, without the internet and comms. It would be just total chaos everywhere. People wouldn't know what to do. It would just be it'd be like one of those things that would just leave people like slack-jawed. Their jaws would be hanging open as they'd be watching these foreign troops just running down the street, marching, just capturing stuff everywhere, different missiles and airstrikes and everything else just hitting all these locations. I mean, it would be like dumbfounding to people. People wouldn't even know how the hell it even happened. You know, they'd be so like dumbfounded by it all, especially when the grid's gone and, you know, the satellites are swatted down. I mean, it would be too much for people. People wouldn't even know. I mean, it would be like shock and awe to like the 10th power. It'd be like 10 times what shock and awe was in Iraq. So it'd be like, it'd be on another level. Be on another level. Well, let's see what people are saying here. I said I'd do an open forum for people. Yeah, unorthodox, it probably is. You know, the whole premise of that card game is that you get to be a set of elites from around the world. And as a set of elites, as a different set of elites, you're trying to acquire nations, you're trying to acquire groups and, you know, use them to your own ends to win the game, to bring about your version of a new world order. That's the whole premise of the game. There's 12 different sets of elites in that game, in that specific game. And you're trying to acquire as many countries as you can, because the whole key to it is you're trying to establish your NWO, and you're trying to beat all the other elites to it. So that sounds a lot like what's going on in real life, because there's massive amounts of power competitions going on between different sets of elites. Very much so. Yeah, on that, well, I good to see you, C-Mac. Let me make you an unorthodox into mods. As moderators, if anybody's being rude to each other or to me, kick them out. But anyway, here's the thing. I just made both y'all mods. I know it doesn't show up right away, but I've turned y'all into mods. But anyway, here's the thing. I did one in the last video about that, and I was saying that it could either be an FF or it could be a nation like Iran doing it, because the IRGC has stated explicitly that they know where all our substations are. Like that's like their basically a sign of intent on their part. So I wasn't saying for sure it was them or it wasn't them. I was saying it could be them or it could be like an FF event. But coming to see how it's developed since I made that, I'm leaning more towards the FF type of thing. And I think that it was a beta test for a larger type of occurrence at a later date, if you know what I mean. This could be the winner that they've been alluding to all along, the Dark One. So this could be beta tests for a time and place when there's like horribly cold weather, horrifically cold weather, to where they would pull something like this at the worst possible time to turn people's power off, so as many people freeze to death as possible. Sort of like when it went down in most of Texas. A lot of Texas lost power 2 years ago. And Texas is massively bigger than just a county here or a county there. I mean, this was like a huge chunk of our state lost power, and that was in 2020. And yeah, people actually died when that happened. People's homes flooded when the pipes burst. Because I even had a pipe burst. I had a pipe burst under my kitchen sink, and when it thawed out when everything thawed out, that thing started to flood, and I woke up just on time too, because I heard it. I heard this gush of water, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And I run into the kitchen because I heard it coming from there, and it just kept coming out and coming out. I'm like, oh shit, so I had to get a special tool to shut off the water to the house, and thank God I was able to do that in time before it flooded the home. But it was horrible, C-Mac. It was horrible. Yeah, everything that happened when that occurred was at like the worst possible time. And that's what I'm saying. I'm thinking that since I'm leaning more towards this thing being some type of FF event, I'm leaning toward that this is all like a potential practice run, because there's a lot of other things that go into this whole thing too, because you have to understand they're trying very, very hard to instigate something. And you know what that something is if you've watched my certain documentary. And what better to do that than all of the just the whole entire war on reality that's been going on with the social engineering and all the other stuff, all the overreach too by this rogue regime doing all their overreach and all the stuff that they've been doing. Then, only then, to remove the power at the worst possible timing when the weather is at its worst. Can you imagine? People would go ape shit. And I think that that's what they're really trying to do here. I really do. I really think that that's what it's all about. And I think also that very soon, very, very soon, the economy is going to be basically brought to a standstill at the same time because the food and fuel crisis is so bad at this point. It's so bad that it's all going to have to collapse here pretty soon. How much longer could things possibly last to where they even seem quasi-normal? Because you have to understand something. A lot of window dressing, tons of window dressing, has not only been going on at stores to camouflage how bad the food situation really is, like where they space out the shelves even wider, where they front all the items, where they items that they no longer have, they just take down the tags for it, where they put on like those painted curtains that they can hang over areas of empty shelving, all of the window dressing that's been going on. And not just in the stores, but also with the generous social programs. They're trying to hide the fact that we are in a real bona fide crisis right here, right now. All the diesel issues. Diesel is at a very short supply right now, very short. Sort of like it was at the beginning of my civil conflict docuseries, the one on the Syrian-style civil conflict, the one that I made, and it's a 5 live stream long hypothetical documentary series. That was a big thing in my series too. There was only a certain amount of fuel that remained in the entire country, and certain factions ended up with more of it than others did. But that's the thing. We are so low right now. It's going to start affecting the transit of goods, of food, of everything. It's going to affect the production of food with like the combines and farming equipment and everything else. I mean, it's going to affect trucking and train transport. It's all going to get really bad. There's no feasible way in hell that things can keep limping by the way that they've been limping by and it just stay in perpetual, just perpetual limbo. There's no way you can stay in perpetual limbo. Bad things that begin to manifest are going to pour over the top at some point or another. It's like when you fill a glass full of a liquid, but you don't stop pouring it, and it just overruns. It just runs over the top. That's what I'm talking about. Things that are continually getting bad cannot just stay in a perpetual limbo forever. At one point or another, it's going to runneth over. And we've really, since the end of August, we've really been in a horrible food and fuel catastrophe. Because our not only did we give away most of our strategic reserves, not give away, but sell to China, to India, then to the EU, to the European Union, but we barely have any left because those reserves are not constantly being refilled. I mean, we're at a very, very desperate state right now, and it just can't continue much longer. So the next shoe to drop will definitely have to be some sort of economic and financial collapse. Because if you go by Jeremiah 50 and 51 as a template, which I do because the word of God is the truth, then you know that famine, which is basically collapse, because if you're having a famine, that pretty much entails that you've collapsed. Famine followed by an internal conflict, because various leaders, conflict or violence will erupt between various leaders, like faction leaders, Then we get invaded by these massive armies, and Jeremiah mentions that multiple times. It's like emphasizing the fact that this just gargantuan, just coalition of nations, led predominantly by China, obviously, because they have the lion's share of the forces that would take over a country this size, but also Russia, who would basically be like the second biggest country contributor to it, and then the whatever allies come after that. That happens right after that this country has ripped itself apart in a multi-way civil conflict, because when it says conflict or violence, depending on the translation you read, will erupt between various leaders, that is describing a Syrian-style civil conflict whereby you have different factions with different leaders. Then they're all fighting each other like a battle royale, like everyone against each other. It's like a multi-way civil conflict, just like the type I depicted in my docu-series. So things cannot continue in limbo forever. At some point, it's all going to come to a head. And it's good that you said that, because I think that that's definitely some sort of a beta test for when they do this in a more widespread type of fashion. I'm pretty sure that they have something diabolically evil like that in the plans, in the cards, But here's the other thing, too. Nothing digital is going to work when the power's out. So if the power is out, there can be no digital money, no digital currency, no digital anything. So I guess if there's a silver lining in it, that would be it. But, what it will entail is it'll entail a situation, just like in my docu-series, where it was a multi-way internal conflict, a collapse had occurred leading into it, because I mentioned that at the very beginning of the first video, all the different conditions that fed into it. It's not going to be any just one issue that leads into something like that. It's going to be a whole plethora of different issues that contribute to something. That's why I listed all these major issues in the first video that led to this entire situation developing, and how it developed along those lines, how it did. It's going to be a whole array of, it's going to be a confluence, a nexus of different issues, where all these different issues come together. It's going to be like a nexus point of various issues intersecting. It's going to be a confluence. It's going to be a whole bunch of different issues that lead into a Syrian-style internal conflict. But the big contributor to it is going to be a economic, food, fuel, and financial collapse. That's going to be a huge, huge indicator that it's about to go down. And then you're going to have all the overreach contribute. You're going to have all the FFs contribute. The poor infrastructure will be a contributing factor. Look what happened to Jackson, Mississippi. Look what happened in Florida. Those places are still reeling from disasters. You're going to have all of these different factors contributing. And I even mentioned the infrastructure in that docu-series too, about how it got so bad, none of it was even repaired because it couldn't repair it. There was no way to repair it, at certain points. It got really bad. And the brownouts got really bad because the power grid wasn't functioning properly, because in the ensuing combat, parts of it got destroyed, and only dedicated service personnel like repair people and maintenance people, engineers, and all those types of personnel. Only the ones that were the most dedicated kept it running at least a little bit. But in most areas, brownouts, regular brown or blackouts, became a part of everyday life, because that's what happens when countries have conflicts. The whole grid fails. It fails. Everything fails, and it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So it's going to be one of those types of things where it's going to be very, very, life is going to get very, very hard. But if there's a caveat to it, one silver lining in it, At least there won't be any digital serfdom. I mean, but aside from that, it's not going to be fun for people. You're not going to be able to, refrigerate your food with power, with electricity. You're not going to be able to cook with electricity. You're not going to be able to heat or cool your home. I mean, it's going to be very inconvenient, I mean, but, all I can say is that I've been in parts of the world where people live without electricity on a daily basis. So, I mean, because there's parts of Iraq that don't even have any power. There's whole villages in Iraq that don't even have power. They live without it all the time, and guess what? They're still alive. They still live. So it's like it's not the end of the world, but it's going to be inconvenient for people that have grown up in Western lifestyles, like Western conveniences. It's like, people that have lived in Disneyland, when the ride is over and it's time to get off the ride, well, you're going to have to become accustomed to a new way of living. It'll be more like how the Amish live, or the people in third world nations. I mean, that's like real life, because really and truly, mankind wasn't meant to have an easy life. We weren't meant to have all these modern amenities and conveniences, but there is going to come a point in time where it's all just going to go down the drain, and people have to be ready for it. And it may come at the worst conceivable time. It may come when the weather is at its absolute worst. And the best thing you can do at that point is learn to wear layers. Wear layered clothing. See, when I grew up in the Northeast, and even when I was in Iraq, that's what we did. We wore layered clothing every time we would go outside. You wear like 2 or 3 sets of pants. You wear 2 or 3 long sleeve shirts and a jacket over that. You wear layers, because if you wear layers and you're inside of a building, even without power, you're going to be all right. You're not going to die. If you're wearing layered clothing, it'll insulate you just enough to where you'll be just fine. But you also have to remember to take care of your feet too, because while you can wear socks and layers, you have to change your socks, or else your feet will suffer for it, and you don't want that. So always remember to change your socks, because socks, they will get sweaty. You can wear gloves too, but you can wear a lot of things. Always keep your head warm and keep your feet warm. You want to remember to change your socks if you have to wear layers of socks. And you want to remember to, if your hands get cold, wear gloves. So even if you're inside, people survive, because in the Middle East, when I was in Iraq, they have what was called a fighting season, because Iraq gets cold in the wintertime. You have no idea. That's like a different kind of cold. It's like bone-chilling cold. Now, like, they don't usually come out to fight you very much in the wintertime. They prefer to come out once the weather is warmed up. See, in the wintertime, in really poor regions of Iraq, because they're, in the cities in Iraq, it's like a whole different world than the villages. The villages are like out there. They're like outback, like sticks type of living, like Amish type of living. But then you have the cities, which have electricity and things. But it's like, if you go into the Iraqi countryside in the wintertime, they won't really fight you that much. Here and there, maybe they'll set like some traps, or, if people, are motivated enough, they might do like an ambush, once in a blue moon in the wintertime. But most of the time, they like to come out and fight you in the summertime, because usually in the wintertime, they'll be huddled up in their mud huts. They stay in bed under tons of blankets in the wintertime. They don't like to come out in the wintertime there. They stay in their mud huts. They'll have like a fire burning in there, and they'll be under like layers and layers of blankets. So what I'm saying, I said all that to say this. If they can keep warm in those conditions, then people here should have no problem. People here should have no problem. Because people here have better clothes and they can dress in layers, you know. I mean, people here have blankets. I mean, you know, it's not like it's the end of the world. But I'm just saying that a lot of people, they don't understand just the very basics of surviving in cold weather conditions. You've got to wear layered clothing. You got to dress in layers. And you've got to remember to change your socks. So that's a big, big thing. You know, as long as you dress in layers, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Or if you get under a whole bunch of blankets, you'll be fine in that case too. But yeah, it's very, very, very important. You know, in fact, I'm glad you even brought that up about the power thing. But I see that as being one of those things that will basically be used against the people to get them into some sort of an uproar. That's how I see it. Because the one difference, the one way you'll know whether it's the foreign invasion or whether it's some type of FF event is that in the foreign invasion, the only thing that should be working is maybe your vehicle, because as long as your vehicle is not connected to the internet, it'll work. You know, so all like vehicles from like early 2000s, maybe 2000 teens or below, they should work fine. But, you know, anything that's connected to the internet will not work because of the Chi-Com cyber attack. Also, the GPS won't work because they're going to swat down our satellites with their anti-satellite weapons, be it the FK-2000 or be it the Russian, you know, S-500, you know, because China has the FK and Russia has the S weapons, and you know they be it that or the other, or be it something even more advanced, because the FK-2000 and S-500 are extremely advanced. But what I'm saying is they might even have something better now. But they're going to knock all the satellites out of the air, including GPS. So when your GPS fails at the same time as your grid fails, your power and water, at the same time the internet and telecom fail, that's how you know it's a foreign invasion. Now, if it's like just the grid, but your phone still works, then it's probably an FF event. So there's differences that can sort of give you an indication of what happened and why, you know. So I'm sure they'll pick the worst possible time to where they would try and do this like in a more widespread sort of a situation. But everybody, be on your guard. If the power goes out, be on your guard. If you have armor and you have personal protection equipment, make sure that you protect yourself. Make sure you protect yourself. Because when the lights are gone, nobody knows what could happen. You know, you don't know if your neighbors are going to go crazy or what. You don't know what could happen. You know, so be ready to practice good, solid self-defense. You know, just self-defense. You know, don't go do nothing. Just stay in your home, protect your property, protect yourself. You know, and just keep watch. You know, just keep a lookout, because you never know what could occur when the grid fails. You just don't know. You don't know. So, see what everybody's saying here. I've been gone for a minute, so I might do another 15 minutes if people have any questions or got anything they want to say. Speak now. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know, CMAC. I don't know. It could be. Maybe January. Who knows? Who knows? If they're really going to do something, I imagine it could be like, if they're going to pull like an FF event, I imagine it would be like sometime in January or Feb, maybe. It could be. Could be. You know, we can always hope not, but it might be. Let's see here. Yeah, unorthodox. In my docu-series, their currency failed miserably, because in most places people didn't use it because there were parallel economies that branched up in different factionally controlled areas. Like in the different areas that the different factions controlled, they all had their own parallel economies and financial systems. So it's like the nobody really used the collapsed digital money, because the digital money was as worthless as the dollar was, the paper dollar, because of how inflated it was. You can't just make something and ascribe a value to it. It actually has to be backed by something, and it was backed by nothing, so it failed. Nobody wanted to use it, and a lot of areas couldn't use it anyway because there was no power. I mean, in a civil conflict, I mean, there's a lot of things like that would fail because there's no way to use it. So it became a flop. It became a failure. It wasn't like this big, horrible thing that people imagined it would be. It ended up being a total flop and a failure. But that goes back to the whole thing about God makes the choices, not man. It doesn't matter. God will determine, what'll succeed and what won't, like what he's going to allow to work and what won't. And that, as it pertains to the evil people in this world, And according to the word, the one world currency is going to be an Eastern currency. It's not even going to be a Western digital anything. It's not going to be a Western anything. The West is going to be destroyed in World War III. It'll be an Eastern New World Order and a New World currency because, come to here, but, BRICS is actually working on one right now. BRICS is actually making a reserve currency to be used by all the members of BRICS. Yep, they all have their own financial transaction messaging systems anyway. I mean, Russia has the FSPS, China has SIPs. They all have their own systems, that are separate from the West. And their plans are different from the West's anyway, because they want to take the West over and colonize it. And anybody that survives in the West will be basically kept as slaves and forced to live in ghost cities. So that's their plans. Their plans are a bit different than the plans of the Western elites, which they'll be a non-issue by the time World War III ends. Hey, just me. Good to see you. Yeah, real fur would be great to get, Aaron. You're absolutely right. Real fur is the best. Because if it works for animals, it'll definitely work for people. Absolutely. Let's see what else. Yeah, I don't see him lasting very long once things go real wrong in this country, unorthodox. I don't see him lasting long at all. Kind of like how the NSRF did those types of people in my scenario. A lot of those people probably won't make it, to be honest. Talking about your Kabbalists or globalists, combining globalism and Kabbalism, globalists. Yeah, they probably won't last very long. A lot of them won't. In a Syrian-style situation, I can imagine a lot of people would be feeling pretty hateful towards people like that. As for me, I'm all about self-defense and self-defense only. You protect yourself, you protect what's yours, and you protect people that need protection. But outside of that, I would have nothing to do with anybody else. Because, in my scenario, anybody who tried to basically involve themselves in a multi-way Syrian-style scenario got basically butchered en masse. For those who watch those, a lot of people fell in that conflict. Especially if you read all the videos, descript boxes. In the very last video, I talk about the biggest battles that I made in that hypothetical and what the casualties were. The biggest one was the battle between the NSRF and the Mormon state, the two most radical factions on the whole map. They had many people get slaughtered in that battle. The overall casualties was like 200. No, it wasn't. It was 100,000. I'm sorry. That's a massive amount of casualties in one battle. Or no, maybe it was 200,000. I can't remember what it was. I have to go look. I did that so long ago. I used to watch it a lot too, not watch it, but listen to it. Yeah, Aaron, that's a good name for him too. Yeah, I used to listen to my internal conflict docu-series a whole lot too, like when I would be like cleaning the house or doing something. That's one of the few things I made that I actually don't mind listening to over and over because I just like how well it was put together, like all the different things it included, from the storytelling to the battle maps to the foreign intervention where they sold weapons to further destabilize this place, to the atrocities, to the leadership, and to all of it, the ideologies, the economies, just all of it came together so well to make such a hell of a good presentation. I mean, it's a long presentation, nowhere near as long as my Invasion audiobook is, which that's good too, but that's like literally like over a day long. So it's really good for long trips and things like that. But if you start listening to the whole audiobook, you're going to be probably listening to it for a few days because the whole thing, if you just listen to it straight through, it's over a day long. But the Syrian style civil conflict docuseries that was about 12 hours long. It's pretty long, but you can finish it in a day. But let's see. I'm gonna get off here soon if nobody else has anything to say. Oh, nothing wrong with that, just me. I like pretzels too. That's a good snack. Pretzels are delicious. Well, guess that's it. Well, you all have a blessed night. Thank you all for coming.